Of course. Now, we'd like to talk to you about how today's elections have been covered outside of Latin America. Can you talk to us about how Western media presented last year's coup against Evo Morales and how they have covered the many missteps made by the de facto authorities?
Well, first of all, the majority of the press in the Western world, particularly the press in the mainstream press in the United States, in Europe, in the different other countries of the Western world, have basically ignored the entire premise of the coup and instead focusing on the false claims made by the Organization of the American States that there was a mega fraud, which an electoral mega fraud committed by the Evo Morales government, which was then, of course, proven false by the Center for Economic Policy and Research in the United States and other research institutes, among them, of course, the MIT, Harvard, and others. So at best, what we saw is occasionally some articles and some stories of concern following the coup with regards to repression, with regards to occasional stories about the abuse of journalists and so on and so forth. So the mainstream media in the Western world have basically acted as the informational arm of the Bolivian regime, and for most part, this is exactly what they've been doing for the last 11 months of the existence of the Bolivian dictatorship as well. We've been seeing the majority of the newspapers ignoring the very real problems that Bolivians are going through at the moment. So the economic crisis caused by the neoliberal reforms being implemented by the M.A.S regime and the horrible mismanagement of the economy. They are completely ignoring the devastation that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, ignoring once again the political persecution of M.A.S activists and of supporters of M.A.S, and really the all of the progress that was made in the last 14 years of Evo's government. So much of that has been lost in this last 11 months, and hardly anything has ever been said in the Western media about that.
I mean, political tensions across the world, one could say, has risen, but the threat for journalists has become more so evident, especially as it relates to progressive movements struggling to hold on to power despite, winning elections. I mean, we saw Glenn Greenwald charged in Brazil for exposing corruption. We have Olabini in Ecuador facing similar charges, and then we've had a similar situation with Julian Assange in England facing extradition. I mean, what are your thoughts as it relates to press freedom and journalists being able to hold governments accountable and be the fourth estate and function as a watchdog?
I would say that first of all, in the experience of El Ciudadano, which has become one of the largest left-wing media platforms in Chile, is that the war against genuine journalism has greatly intensified in the last several years, and of course we also know of the of how dangerous the profession is in countries like Mexico and Colombia, but in the case of Bolivia as well, what we've seen is that a large number of journalists and of independent media organizations also being attacked either by the current M.A.S regime or by the associated paramilitary or far right forces over there. And this started happening from the first days of the coup. Since in those very first days, we saw journalists being assassinated, such as the Argentine journalist Sebastián Moro. We've seen outlets being censored, such as teleSUR, of course, and RT channels. We saw other journalists being attacked on the street by activists of the coup regime, such was the case of Argentine journalists. So these days we're suddenly seeing a lot more physical violence being led against genuine journalists, and not just the persecution of figures like you mentioned at Assange or Albini. So it has certainly been a it is certainly become a struggle for genuine journalists to demonstrate the situation as it really happens. So I especially commend the efforts of some of the individuals who are currently on the ground in Bolivia, such as teleSUR's Camila and Casachun Cocas Oliver Vargas, for putting themselves on the front lines and reporting what is really happening. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Now, can you talk to us about the economic interests that supported not only last year's coup, but have pushed for a return of the IMF to Bolivia, as well as the privatization of major industries which were developed in their entirety under the government of Evo Morales?
Certainly. Well, probably as many of the listeners and of the viewers know, before the coup, Bolivia was actually on the verge of signing a historic deal with several German conglomerates on the development and construction of lithium processing plants in the province of Uyuni, which is one of the largest lithium reserves in the world. This would have effectively began a process of industrialization in that region, and especially the process of making Bolivian-made electric cars. Now, a lot of this as well was seen as a threat by a number of other economic actors in the world, such as multinational corporations as well. And in this case, I'm talking about Tesla. And earlier this year, we also saw this statement by Tesla CEO Elon Musk, saying that in response to the developments, the current developments in Bolivia, that they would coup whoever they want, referring to referring to the allegations that Tesla was in some ways behind, also supportive of either the coup or the current regime. So the question of lithium has been has certainly been the key in this case. Moving on now to the question of the IMF, there was there has been an ongoing attempt to effectively indebt the country by the A.S. regime. The most prominent attempt has been basically to force a $300 million loan down the throat of the Bolivian people, allegedly because of the current allegedly because of the economic problems that the Evo administration left the A.S. regime, which is of course far from truth, because Bolivia's economy was one of the strongest in the region before the coup. It was recording economic growth of between 3 and 4% for the last 5 years, had the largest foreign exchange reserves of any other country in Latin America in terms of percentage of the GDP, and as I mentioned before, it was just about to start a major process of industrialization. And what we're actually finding now is a situation similar to Argentina in the years of 2016 and 2017, when the neoliberal Macri administration was signing a number of IMF deals and approving more and more of IMF debt, allegedly for economic recovery. But as we've seen in the case of Argentina, all that has led to was even more privatizations, rises in inequality and in poverty, and unnecessary and unjust debt that could not be repaid.
I mean, you mentioned Musk. Musk said, we will coup whoever we want, deal with it. I mean, does this really exemplify how the coup regime and really pandering to the interest of foreigners who are seeking to take over the country's resources rather than support the people?
Well, the Bolivian regime has been pandering to the foreign interests since the day that it came to power, very much so, because we saw the Bolivian regime strengthen and basically rebuild the ties with the United States. So the regime once again rebuild the ties with the Israeli regime, and as well as creating new connections, creating new ties with the other neoliberal and right-wing regimes in the region, especially with Brazil and Colombia, as well as entering the Grupo de Lima cartel, which was designed to effectively, to diplomatically and politically isolate Venezuela. And all of this speaks of the fact that the current regime that is in power in Bolivia is not in any way representative of the economic interests of Bolivians, or even for that matter of the Bolivian national interest. It is very much a product of on one hand side the reactionary, conservative traditional forces in the military, in the province of Santa Cruz, the landowning elite there, as well as parts of the new bourgeoisie that was created in the last 14 years. And on the other hand side, the support by the traditional imperialist powers, like the United States, like the European Union, and their allies in the region, and of course, for multinationals such as Tesla.
Now, you spoke about countries like Chile, Venezuela. I mean, we've seen popular protests occur in a lot of these countries, calling for democracy, respect for sovereignty, and we've also seen the same thing take place in Chile, where protesters called for a revamp of the constitution from the dictatorial era. And in Bolivia, I mean, what does this say for Latin American countries? The fight continues. I mean, what is your thoughts on these sort of mobilizations where people are definitely frustrated with the way governments and people are managing the country?
Well, it's important to note that today marks the first anniversary of the mass social uprising in Chile, which of course started off over the matter of the increases in the price of metro in the capital of Santiago, which the initial protests that were organized mostly by youth and by students were met by a very vicious repression by Chile's carabineros, which then spiraled into this. So, excuse me, which then spiraled into this mass uprising, mass revolt, not just against the current neoliberal government of Sebastián Piñera, but also against the entire political and economic system that has been in place in Chile since September 11, 1973. And there was one particular phrase that was used to describe the way in which this process escalated. It was said, it's not about the 40 pesos, the price hike, it's about the 40 years. So this wasn't just a process about one particular issue, but rather it was a symptom of a much bigger problem. It was a symptom of a repressive, sick, and extremely unequal system that has been in place in Chile, which was imposed on Chile through a coup, which has effectively been continued since the return to democracy in the late 80s. So in many ways, the revolt and the ongoing process of this new citizens' revolution, as we say in Chile, is very much the is on one hand side kind of the product of the popular memory that that Chile did once have a popular government, Salvador Allende, which set out to effectively fix the Chilean society and fix the mass inequality that existed in there and radically change the economic and political system of the country. And on the other hand side, recognizing that with the current constitution that is in place, and with the current governments and the governments that have come before, it would be impossible for the Chilean people to deal with any of the problems they have at the moment. And similar revolts have also taken place, of course, in Ecuador and in Colombia against once again against privatizations, high unemployment, inequality, the myriad of problems which neoliberalism has traditionally created in Latin America. And in all of these cases, we saw that the response by the government has effectively been the same. It's shoot first and then ask why there are masses of people on the streets later.
Yeah, definitely. We saw the same thing in Chile with people losing their eyes. The same thing would have occurred in Ecuador. And then in Bolivia, we saw people losing their lives in a much bigger way, with people being massacred by police forces. Denis, thank you so much for joining us and really giving us your thoughts on what is taking place in Latin America.
Thank you.